prepared, but like normal, just interrupt. Let's make this really interactive. And I'm keen for this to be actionable, not just theory. But yeah, definitely please do interrupt. So I'll share this. Awesome. And make sure I can still see all of you. Okay, cool. So I think we might start with the discussion of, there's this natural assumption that we should just have co-founders. And I think we should talk about also the option of not having a co-founder. And also talking about why co-founders are valuable, which might sound obvious as well. But statistically, actually, I'm just going to move this because it's sort of gone over one of my, can you guys still see that now I've dragged it?
Yeah.
So this font's really small, and you don't worry about the detail so much as the point that it's trying to make, which is statistically, you're much more likely to be successful if you have co-founders. So the sweet spot seems to be a co-founding team of 2 to 4 people, typically 2 to 3. And that when I say statistically more successful, you're more likely to raise money. Now, that's an interesting one, though, because investors are biased by the fact that statistically companies are more likely to be successful if you have co-founding teams. So it's almost like a self-perpetuating bias that if you have co-founders, you're more likely to get investment because the investors are looking for co-founders because they believe it's more likely you'll be successful. If you're doing something like, often you also hear that you need a technical co-founder and you need your tech in-house. So for those of you who are building your own app or software, and that's very true, particularly if you're selling to enterprise. So if you're selling to something that's an enterprise client, like you're selling to the top end of town in the corporate space, then statistically, absolutely, you need your tech in-house because the quality, the standard, usually the complexity of what you're building. But interestingly, not so much when it's just more of a consumer application. And there's this interesting statistic that you're 31% more likely to be successful as co-founders of a consumer application, actually, if you're not technical. And you hire in or outsource your tech. So I found that one quite interesting. And then the other part of teams I'm going to talk about today is not just the people you hire, but who else you have around you. So in terms of mentors and others. And interestingly, founders who've had a previously successful business are 30% more likely to be successful in the next one. Founders who've previously had a failure, so a business failure, are still 20-something% more likely to be successful at their next one. And this is sort of where mentors and your advisory board and your board of directors can really help, because if you've got experienced entrepreneurs, or whether they've been successful or a previous failure, they actually are statistically adding to your likelihood of success, if that makes sense. So all of these things indicate that we should have a team, a complementary team. And you guys would have heard of HIPSTER. So HIPSTER is a global accelerator program. So they run hundreds of accelerators around the world. But they also have quite a large venture capital fund. So they're investors. And multiple funds, like just put it in context, I think their first fund was something like 130 US million. Their second fund was 400 US million. I'm not sure what fund they're up to now, but billions of dollars in capital that they invest into startups every year. And the reason I mention them here is in their selection criteria for looking at what they invest in and the companies that go into their program is they actually have 6 investment criteria. And does anyone want to guess what the first one is? The first criteria? Co-founders. It's team. So, yep, co-founders. Does anyone want to guess what the second criteria is?
It's tech.
No, it's actually, the second one is actually also team. So, and the third one is also team. The fourth one is the problem that you're solving. The fifth one is the size of the market. And the sixth one is the idea. And the reason they say that the idea is on there is they actually don't care about it, but they want you to know that it's the last thing that they look at. Your idea is actually the least significant thing. And the reason they say team 3 times is because they want to emphasize that that's the most important thing, is your team. So team, problem, market size, and then idea. And I think it just highlights the point that, this is a major investment fund, and they recognize that what they're investing in is people. So like 50% of their investment criteria is looking at the people behind what's being built rather than actually what's being built. So then the question is, do we really have to? Some of us are, sort of kicking and screaming against having to bring other people into our businesses. And I totally get that. And what I'm going to share now is the counter argument to what I've just said. And that is that there are so many examples of companies that have been successfully built, small businesses that have been successfully built and continue to run and had exits where there was just one founder. There was no co-founders. And so Crunchbase, if you're not familiar with Crunchbase, it's a site used more so outside of Australia, so particularly in the US and other startup hotspots. That basically startups put themselves on there, and it tracks all the investments that go into startups. And like you can see, AngelList is another one. You can see what companies got funded, who's in those companies. Like it's a really good little database actually to do research. Like for any of you that are looking at who might acquire me one day or who might invest in a company like me, you can actually go on there and look at what other companies like you have been invested in or who's bought them. Anyway, people did research on the data, and they found that the average of the companies that have exited, of all the companies that have exited on Crunchbase, they had an average of 1.7 co-founders, which means there's lots there that must only have one founder. And the other telling part here is that 23% of startups that fail mention team issues as their cause of failure. And I can personally speak to the amount of time I spend, helping founders with co-founder disputes and co-founder breakups. It's incredibly common. And part of this is because when we go and get co-founders and build teams, they look like this, where, I don't know if any of you are fans of The Hangover, but I think The Hangover is this perfect example of a typical startup team that we might see, where you've got the one guy that's doing everything, then you've got that person that's just like sending the whole team into chaos and going backwards. You've got the people who sort of say that they're committed to what you're doing and never show up, and the people who think they're helping and really not helping. And so really the selection, what I'm getting at here is your selection of co-founder is more critical than the number or the statistic or whatever. It's all about, do you have the right people on your team? So I guess what I'm getting at is don't just, go through the exercise of I need a co-founder. Okay, I've got one tick. It's not about I need to tick this box. It's more about I need a complementary team, and I need someone I can work with, and I need alignment with that person. I need to be able to communicate effectively. All those things matter way more than just the number of co-founders, which all sounds logical. There's some other stuff here. I'll share these slides afterwards. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but just sharing some data around the counter argument of do you need to have co-founders. So again, looking at this Crunchbase data of startups that have raised $10 million in funding, the majority of them, actually I shouldn't say majority, 45% actually had just one founder at the point they raised the 10 million in funding. Now, what this data doesn't tell us though is who that one founder was. So, if that was Elon Musk having come out of a company and he's in there, that's a very different proposition to a first-time founder with no credibility, no previous history. So we don't have data on who that founder is that is raising that money. But what you can tell from that is 55% of ventures that get funding have multiple founders. And like we said at the start, it's just statistically, that's because investors believe there's more probability of success. And similar with those that have exited. Interestingly, 52% of companies that have exited on Crunchbase, as listed on Crunchbase, only had one founder, which is pretty phenomenal. The other thing this doesn't tell us is anything about what those companies were, how big they were when they were purchased, all that sort of stuff. But the point of all this is just to show that, look, there's lots of arguments for having a co-founder, and statistically, yes, you're more likely to be successful, but there's so many examples of being successful where it's just one person on their own. And I think I really encourage you to think critically about it. Like, do I really want a co-founder at this point? And we'll talk later about how to find them, but I just see lots of people rushing into a co-founder relationship because of this urge to tick that box. And I just see it's fraught with danger. Does that all make sense so far? Does anyone want to challenge any of that thinking? Like, does it resonate?
resonates for me.
Yeah.
Balance within your team.
Yeah, we'll talk about, finding the right people, but look, statistically, more likely to be successful, but can you succeed without a co-founder? Absolutely. So next, I just want to talk about a context for understanding, a complementary team. And by this, I'm talking a little bit about your whole team beyond just your co-founders. And I probably should also just, make it really clear. When we talk about a co-founder, we're talking about someone who is like founding the business with you. So they would have an equity stake typically in the business, and they're on the journey of growth to be that critical part of making it happen, as opposed to, someone that you hire in, like a contractor or an employee, or a freelancer or advisors. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't still give those people equity. Like, you can absolutely hire a developer to be part of your team and give them equity. Whether they're a co-founder or not it's like a different discussion. And that's because, to me, co-founder comes more down to how much of a decision-making power, I guess, or role do they play in the business? Like, are they actively involved in the direction of the business? Do they wear multiple hats? What is what's the totality of their investment into the company? Not just like a financial investment, but the totality of their investment and journey with the company as well. But in terms of your startup dream team, like we often say in the startup ecosystem, you want a hipster, hacker, hustler, and increasingly we talk about a humanitarian as well. And I'll just go quickly through these. This is just one lens of looking at a team. But basically, when we talk about a hustler, you need someone who can sell. So, and by sell, I mean someone who can be the brand ambassador. And you think of Richard Branson with the Virgin Empire, like, it's just such a perfect brand ambassador. And in many ways, Virgin is just a marketing company. Like, you look at everything they've attached their brand to, what they're really good at is marketing. And that's sort of in Branson's DNA. So you need someone in the business who is the face of your brand, who is able to inspire people to go on the journey, who embodies your brand. And hustler can be a bit off-putting, I think, as a term, because it implies someone it's all about almost ripping people off. And look, there's definitely a need for someone to be able to sell the product, but it's not hustle in the sense of, let's just go make squillions and not really care about the delivery. Then hacker. So hacker's obviously got a coding or a software engineering sort of meaning to it. But hacker, when we talk about a hacker, we don't mean someone that's literally like hacking into a financial system or something. We mean hack in the sense of being able to pull things to hack things together to make them work. So sort of like the MacGyver. So someone who can take the duct tape, the Band-Aids and the fire extinguisher and turn it into a product. So you need someone who can build what you're doing. That's essentially what the hacker means. The hacker role is who can build what you're creating. And for each of you, that'll be quite different. So Athel, the app side of what you're doing versus if we were doing this as more of a service versus something else. But who's actually able to build your product or service? Then the hipster, which again has all sorts of connotations when we say the word hipster, but basically we mean who can make this look cool? Who's your designer? Who's the person who's going to be doing your marketing collateral? Looking after your logo and your branding and how you position your brand in the market and all those sort of questions. So you need someone who has ownership of that. This picture, if you don't know who this person is, that's actually Melanie from Canva. So Canva's an amazing Australian success story. It's now unicorn status, which means it's worth over $1 billion, based out of Sydney. Melanie's a phenomenal founder who's built that company. We put her there because she's design, and Canva is a design platform. But when you think about hipster, think about who can make my product and brand really sing and resonate, who can do that visual storytelling piece, who can create the design work, the graphic design work, and all that sort of stuff. And then lastly, we have humanitarian. And look, this is increasingly becoming part of teams. It doesn't mean you necessarily need this role filled, but there's a big shift. And I think all of you would have seen this with COVID too, like this shift now to more social enterprise, and even down to the goods that we buy outside of a social enterprise. We're much more conscious of what we're buying and who we're buying from. And there's been a major, globally, there's been a big shift of consumer sentiment to really spend time understanding who we're buying from and the value system of that company. So this humanitarian role is basically looking at who inside the organization is looking at your social good, who's really understanding the customer and having empathy with the customer and what the customer wants and what the customer needs. And it's all about being focused on value. So increasingly, I think it's an important role going forward. Now, they can also look after, the ethics, making sure you're doing good business practice and all those sort of things. Now, those 4 elements of your dream team. Now, you might, in the early days, be all 4 of them. In fact, when you're starting, you pretty much have to be. But you'll know that you're better at some of these than others. For some of us, the thought of, being Richard Branson and the front face out in the media, getting all that publicity scares the shit out of us because we don't want that role. We don't want that scrutiny. For others, the concept of designing something that looks cool is just outside of our current skill set. It's like, I have no design skills. I need someone else. So you can outsource this in the early days, and we'll talk about that. But that's one way of looking at your core team. The other way of, actually, I should stop there. Does that all make sense? Like when we talk about HIPSTER, hacker, hustler, humanitarian. Any questions on those roles through that lens? No? Cool. The other way of looking at complementary teams and what you need to be doing, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is, often typically when we're talking about building a team, we think in terms of roles. Like, I need someone to build my product. So therefore I need a software engineer. Therefore I need to hire like a web developer. Or we might think of it in terms of sales, and I need to hire someone from my social media. We tend to think in roles. What I want to emphasize here is we need to also think about all the aspects of the skill sets needed for the business. So, we need people who are really good at communication. And I don't just mean external communication, but internal communication. Who inside our team and our company as we build it is going to be, there's some teams just have that central person that they're like the social glue for the team because they're really good communicators. And when John's going off his tree in a rant about something over here, he can sort of like translate it to Mary over here and the language that she speaks. So who inside your team is that good communicator? Who's the good problem solver? Who's good with strategy? Who's good at systems and processes and procedures? Because if you're all aiming to build growing companies, you're going to have to put in systems, processes, and procedures. And for you to sit there and do them is a bit of a waste of your time because you should be out growing the business, working on the business rather than in it. So there are people who love doing that stuff. Like the thought of me sitting down and writing procedures would bore me to tears. But there are people who they love that. It fuels their fire. So go find those people to perform that role. And you can see the others listed there, like even, down to leadership and other things. The point of this is, as well as hiring or bringing people into your team for roles and output, you need to think about these other skill sets that you need in the team. Critical problem solve, like the ability to see a problem and solve it and think strategically, to come up with creative solutions, to do the bold thinking, to be able to communicate. All of them are really important to have. And particularly in a small team, you need to be able to cover these off. Does that all make sense? It's just something we often forget though. Like we tend to hire for roles and then realize, well, we don't really have anyone in the team who's social and connects everyone. Or we don't really have anyone in the team who is good in crisis when the house is on fire. You want that firefighter type personality that can step up and put the fire out. So it's a good thing to be aware of. And then this is where like some of that conversation you guys were having at the start about what you want to touch on today, I think will come up in these next few slides. Like, because the other thing we need to be conscious of is when we're hiring or when we're bringing people into the team is looking at the fit of our culture and organization. So if you're building a skateboarding company, for example, and your entire persona and the customers that you're servicing are really, that edgy, maybe a bit grungy, like youthful brand, and you hire, an ex-CFO of an accounting firm, not to tarnish them with any, boring brush, but you can imagine a disparity of how their culture and their personality and how that might influence the team and the brand. So you need to be really conscious of making sure how will this person fit inside the culture of what I'm trying to build. And I'll give you an example of this, which is Uber. So if you go, I'll contrast Uber and Airbnb. So Airbnb in their headquarters in San Francisco, every meeting room is modeled off an actual room of one of the Airbnb houses from somewhere in the world. So when you might go and have a meeting inside Airbnb in San Francisco headquarters, and you'll go into a room and it'll say on the door, this is Jane Smith's library from her apartment in France. And it's an exact replica of a real customer's room from their Airbnb listing. And the reason they do that is because they want every staff member to always be thinking about their customer first. That's their culture, is we need to be thinking about our customer in everything we do. Whereas Uber, when you go inside Uber, it's like this cold, dark, like it's like you're walking into just this soulless, like sort of like evil empire, like Darth Vader style. But that's their culture, because you look at how they launched, it was a brute force attack on every government around the world. It's like, we're going to go and operate illegally in stealth and get so many people to ride in our cars that by the time law enforcement catches up, the consumer sentiment will be lobbying the government to change the rules to allow us to exist. And that was their culture. And therefore they hired for that culture. So, being really conscious of, you don't want to hire that, like in this slide, that the sheep that doesn't fit in, because it can just become a friction point. And be really conscious of the culture that you want inside your company and hiring for that culture. We might come back and talk more about this at the end, but does that make sense? Like really being conscious of, the culture and the persona that you want to have in your organization. Again, it's all intuitive, right? But it's one of those things that we tend to read someone's CV or look at their LinkedIn profile, and we don't actually take a moment to understand their cultural fit. And it is really critical. So what a lot of teams will do in their hiring process is actually get someone to come in and work alongside the team for a couple of days and meet everyone on the team, and everyone on the team has to be happy with that new person coming in before they get approved. Techstars does this. So I gave the example of Techstars and how they invest at the start. So when you're going for investment at Techstars, you have to meet every general partner, so every person who is on the investment committee. And if any single one of them have a red flag, whatever it doesn't matter what it is, they just have some like point of nervousness with you or a red flag in the conversation, then the deal's off. It has to be 100% everyone agrees on that person or that investment. And like lots of teams treat HR in a similar way. It's like, rather than just interview someone in a closed room with the manager and then hire them, and then 2 weeks later they start and you bring them in, it's the first time your team's met them and they don't get along. It's like you've just set yourself up for disaster. Like include your whole team in that recruitment process. And then diversity. So diversity obviously gets talked about a lot, but I want to take a moment and really emphasize why it's so powerful, because this comes back to this discussion of sole founder versus co-founder. So diversity for me is all about perspective. How do you have as many different perspectives on a situation as possible? Because, and there's this great talk by a guy called Bo Lotto. There's heaps of YouTube video stuff, but he talks about how do we get from A to B. So whatever it is, whatever journey we're on, how do we get from point A to point B? And it sounds so obvious, but what he says is every journey from point A to point B first requires you to leave point A, right? It's so obvious. But the thing is, without perspective change, sometimes we can't see that. We can't see where we need to go. We can't see things differently. We can't see the opportunity that we've lost. We can't see our biases and our assumptions. But by having different perspectives, you can overcome some of that. So this is where diversity is key. There's so many studies. I've quoted one on this one about Harvard Business Review saying that companies that have higher than average diversity of thinking, and that's diversity across all measures, have 19% higher innovation revenues. In other words, revenues from innovative new ideas. And for all of you, you're doing something innovative. You're doing something new. You're doing something that hasn't been done before. You're doing it in a different way. And that requires you to be thinking different to how things are currently done. And therefore, you want as much diversity of thinking as possible on your team. And you can solve this through who you hire, through advisors and mentors. I know I'm sort of belating this point, but it is really, just the power of it is really critical.
Aaron, can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Just with that diversity thing, do you not think that a difference in perspective might contradict the the rule around cultural fit?
Yes, absolutely. So that's a really good point. So you need to be cognizant of both, I think. So cultural fit is important, but if cultural fit comes at the cost of you just having almost like a chicken factory of people who think exactly the same, then you'll end up probably moving really fast, but you'll move in just one line where you miss so much other stuff. And I think your question is spot on. Like, it does become a bit of a balancing act between diversity of perspective. Probably means you're going to have teams that challenge each other a lot more, that you debate things a lot more, and that can feel slow at times, and it become a friction point, and there can be that tension where it feels like people don't fit. So it needs a management process around it, I think, and a really good, healthy culture of open conversation.
And almost a sorting process. So if you prioritized it and said, numero uno, culture's number one, but then the rung below culture, you look at diversity, for example, and go, are they a great cultural fit? Yes, there might be, 10 people with that great cultural fit, but do they have the cultural fit as well as diversity? So I think the two can coexist. It might you'd have to really scratch below the surface to look at it.
Yeah, I think so too, Trish. And I think it makes me think there's a company here on the Gold Coast called Pet Wellness Centres who are building a new way, a whole new model of veterinary clinics. It's basically like a holistic, total well-being animal welfare. And Kathy, the founder, has done this amazing piece of work on their cultural values. So they just have, it's basically a 3 criteria simple decision-making process for everyone in the organization. And that is, anytime a staff member has to make a decision, number 1, is it good for the pet or the patient, the animal? Number 2, is it good for the customer? And number 3, is it good for the business? And she's empowered her staff to have that criteria, and she'll back her staff 100% of the time, so long as they use those 3 criteria. So whatever they decide to do, give a customer a refund or tell a customer they'll do this for free, whatever it is, so long as it went through that decision framework. And that's where I think you can define a culture that allows different perspectives and different personality types to still operate. There's a framework for making decisions. They might have a different point of view on it, but there's still that framework there. But yeah, I think, sorry, I don't know why there's so many loud cars going past my place today. But I think you're spot on, Trish. I think it will always be a friction point. I think it's something, like you said, to be really cognizant of. I'm going to introduce something here now. This we could spend a bit of time on this if you're keen, or I can just sort of skip over it. But a lot of the work I do is around behavioural profiling. So, and Trish, you may be across this stuff quite well. Many of you have probably done things like Myers-Briggs before, all different types of personality profiling. I really encourage it for self. Like I look at it as, genuine curiosity about self-awareness. I think the most effective entrepreneurs I know are incredibly self-aware. They know their weak spots. They know how they react under pressure. They know how they react under stress. They know how that manifests and how they can be perceived by others. And so I encourage you to look at all the different profiling techniques that are out there. Personal favorite is Clifton Strengths. It goes through your natural strengths and the way you process things. But this one I've got on the screen is actually something called the DISC profile, DISC. The particular one that I use is called Extended DISC. And look, there's lots of free versions online. The free ones are okay. They're not great. We actually go through a company for our profiling tool that it's basically 20 questions, but the insights you get out of it are phenomenal. But I just want to give you a quick overview here because I do really believe in this profiling tool to identify behavior. So this is looking at someone's behavior, how they communicate, and how you can adjust communication. And what I'm going to get you to do just as an exercise is, hopefully you can see the words on that slide clearly enough you can make them out. But what I'd like you to do is just take a piece of paper and just do 4 quadrants to match the 4 quadrants on the screen. And just the words that resonate for you out of those 4 quadrants, just write them on the sheet of paper. And so what we'll end up with, you might have a quadrant where none of the words are really like you, they're just not strongly connected to you. And you might have another quadrant where all the words are like, man, that's 100% me. Or you might have a mix mash. But just the words that most strongly resonate for you, just jot them down in the relevant quadrant to match the screen. We'll take like 5 minutes on this, and then we'll chat about what that means and what you can sort of identify from yourself through that process. Is that all clear as mud? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Precise. Yeah.
Yeah, if you need me to read any of them out, I'm happy to do that as well.
You didn't have any? No, it's not.
I got one and see.
What's that? Precise.
No, analytical, because I do like to analyze shit.
So it sounds like you probably got most of them done. What does anyone want to share? Did you anyone end up with more of the words resonating from D?
Yeah.
Yep. A couple of you. I.
Yeah, I'm a strict I.
Okay.
I
S.
got all of them and I. They're all me.
Oh, all of them are you.
Yeah.
Anyone C?
I got two.
Yep.
I didn't see.
Okay. Cool. So I'll quickly explain DISC. And look, I'm more than happy to do we could do an entire session on this. But I think it's just good for just general awareness at this point. But basically, the DISC behavioral profiling tool just breaks people down into 4 personality types based on this. This is really about behavior and communication. And the 2 axes are whether you are, so people tend to be either people orientated or task orientated. So people focused or task focused, that's one axis. And then the other axis is whether you are action orientated or whether you're more sort of stable. You could also, one way of looking at it's not quite correct, but fast versus slow. Like, do you tend to do things really quickly? Let's go, let's go, let's go. Or do you tend to be, hang on, let's really think about this. Let's do this right. So they're the axis. And what happens is you end up with these 4 personality types where D is like direct or driven. And the personality type here tends to be really decisive. They tend to be really focused on goals, KPIs, getting shit done. They're very task orientated and they're very action orientated. So I want to say they care less about the people. That's probably a bit harsh saying it that way. But for them, it's all about, let's get things done. Let's get it done now. So you tend to get a lot of CEO types, salesperson, like property, real estate agent type salespeople in the D quadrant. Then I tends to be, I is more about influence. So for I, it's much more sociable, talkative. You can see on the chart, like they're people orientated. So for them, it's less about the task, more about the people. They want to know who else is coming on this journey with them. They tend to be, so Richard Branson is a good I. Like Richard Branson is like out there, flamboyant, influencing, but also leading, like taking other people on that journey. Whereas D, if I choose a really bad example for D, I don't want to offend any Ds, but D is much more sort of your Trump. It's like Darth Vader. It's like, I'm sure there's much better examples. I just can't think of one. I'm being really harsh on that.
No, Trump, you're Trump. That's how it is.
I don't know what it's on there.
Then S is steadiness. So S is still people orientated, but much slower in terms of methodical. So much like stable. So S is about when something happens, it's like, well, how does everyone feel about this? Is everyone okay? S, they're people pleasers. They want to make sure that everyone, I hear some of you laughing. These resonate. Yep. And then C is more, so C is about certainty. Like this is C type people. You can see it's all about task orientated and slow and methodical. So these are your perfectionists. You ask a C type personality for an opinion and they can't give you one because it might be wrong. They want to make sure it's coming from a place of fact. So C's end up being, you know, like really good accountants or a lot of programmers, a lot of software engineers are C type personalities because it's all about logic, facts, certainty. So if you, if I gave a really bad example of this, like if you took these 4 personality types and sent them into Coles to get some food for an event, C would be the person that has to look at every can on the shelf, does all the calculation, which one's the best price, which one's the best quantity, and then finally make their decision. All right, now I've got this because it is factually the best one. A D would be like, all right, let's fucking get in there. Let's smash it out. Let's get this list done. Man, I came out, I got all 10 items in 5 minutes. Awesome. I'm amazing. And I would be like, hey, everyone, I'm going shopping. Who wants to come with me? Let's go. And it would be a whole experience and there'd be a whole event around it. And afterwards they'd run like a public event with a panel session talking about the amazing shopping experience they had.
Yeah.
And then an S would be like, are we sure? Like, is everyone okay with what we're buying today? Like, is anyone gluten intolerant? Is everyone got this? Like, are we all good? Are you happy with my purchase? I actually bought 2 types of beans just to make sure. So once you understand this, you can see that basically all humans fall into one of these, but you can also start to see the friction points because the diagonally opposite personality types end up in arguments. So when a D is talking to an S, and a D just wants to get shit done, let's go, why hasn't it happened already? And an S is like, hang on, let's make sure everyone's okay with this. Have you told everyone? And same with an I and a C. So I'm an I, and then I have a close friend who's a C. And like when I say, let's go do something, like, let's go, let's bring everyone in. And the C is like, well, hang on, let's come up with a schedule. When is this happening? No, not tomorrow. That's too, I need a week's notice. So very different personality type. But then the other part of this is then looking at how do they fit in different roles? Because if you've taken a C type personality and you're expecting them to be the front face of your company out hosting events and facilitating things, they're going to feel really uncomfortable with that. Whereas if you had an I personality who's out as your public spokesperson, as the Richard Branson type, they're going to be much more comfortable there. So, you know, a classic example of that is if any of you saw Mark Zuckerberg when he was at the, what were they called? The Senate, not at Senate, but the inquiries in the US. So Mark Zuckerberg is a C-type personality, and now he's out in the public with all this public scrutiny, like just completely uncomfortable, no personality, just because he's not in his zone of natural behavior. So anyway, this is a tool that you can go into nth degrees, but where it becomes interesting is that team dynamic piece and how you can adjust your behavior and communication. But also for all of you, if you recognize, look, I'm a D, then you need to look at your whole team and think, well, I better not get a co-founder who's also a D, because we'll just leave all the people behind. Yeah, we'll hit our KPIs, but our team will probably hate us because no one's looking after the team side of things. Equally, if you're an I, you might want to counterbalance that with a co-founder who's more C, because even though it'll create friction, the C person will look at all the procedures and are we doing this correctly? Have we actually met all our legal requirements? How are our accounts up to date? So you can see how this influences into a complementary team. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's a really, like, you can read, there's heaps of videos on YouTube about DISC. You can go into way more detail. But I think these sort of tools are really useful to look at. Again, the point I'm trying to emphasize is don't just look at the role you need done, like the output. Look at the human. How do they fit with my values? How do they fit with our culture? How do they fit with bringing a different perspective to the table? How do they fit in how my blind spots? Like if I'm a D, I literally just cannot see the world like an S does. So I should get some S-type personality on my team so that I get that lens, I get that point of view. So again, just another thing to be aware of. Any questions on that before we sort of move forward?
I got a question. I seem to fit into a fair few of them, and it just depends on what I'm doing. So in my nursing role, I'll actually be a lot of C, and because that fits the role really well. Yeah, so it's just a bit interesting because initially I thought I was more D, but I'm probably a more I and S now. But I certainly have to be in that D situation as well at times. Yeah.
See, I'm an I too, and I did this many years ago when I was going through all the Tony Robbins stuff. We did all the DISC profiles, and I'm like way off the charts on the I. But I actually really love people who are the C because it takes a lot of weight off your shoulders because you're like, oh, I don't have to deal with that shit. Like, there's so much like, take it and go. So you get this trust there to go, actually somebody else has got that part and I don't need to worry about it. So
It really helps you to be your I.
yeah, it
You
really
don't have to
does.
worry about the C stuff. You can be more sociable.
Yeah, and actually doing what you need to be doing. So I think it's really good to have people who are different because you're like,
Yeah, you do that, and I'll do what I would.
yeah.
That's a spot on point, and it's something we hear a lot when we go in and do this inside teams and for individuals, is this sense of, oh, now I can own myself and I don't have to feel this guilt that I'm not good at doing procedures. I get it now. I'm good here. I can empower someone else to be good over here. And so what you just said, yeah, is a really common, I guess, like enlightenment that comes from this process is, oh, I can stick in my lane and be awesome here. I don't have to be all of these things. And I can empower other people to do that. And then Athel, what you said, yeah, so when you do the full profile, like the extended profile, so I should say, yes, you can be multiple letters. So you can be, 80% D, 10% I, 10% C. That's quite common. But then how we show up, like which parts of them get emphasized or downplays depends on where we are in the context of what we're doing. So when you do the full profile, you get your natural state, which might be high D, and then your adjusted state, which you might suppress your D and be more C because, like you were saying, in your role, you have to be more C. Or because the people around you in your team are all Ds and you're like, well, there's no point in me being a D here. I need to find my fit. And so we adjust. And this is when you do that process, you can start understanding why you feel uncomfortable in certain teams or why you don't feel heard or sort of like suppressed. It's because you've had to so significantly adjust your natural personality style that you're sort of out of your comfort zone. You might have to be like really S in your role and it's just not naturally you. And the other thing is these things change over time. So they can be massively impacted by trauma experiences or growth experiences or just changes of perspective. But yeah, everything you guys have just said touches, like it just resonates so well.
It's interesting.
It's really cool. I love it.
Because I'm surrounded by S's. So
Oh, that's interesting.
I probably evolved myself into more of a D role because in healthcare, nursing, everyone, like most people are S's to a degree.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool.
The final thing I want to say on this one is you can apply this same thinking to your business. So if you thought of your business as a person, what box would you want your business to be in? So, you know, if you're doing something that's fintech, for example, fintech is almost like you want a fintech to be in C, because when you think of a finance company, you want security, you want trust, you want confidence, you want certainty of fact. You want to know that they've ticked every box to make sure that every aspect of security is dealt with and that they're operating 100% compliantly and legally. So for a fintech company, it's almost like they want a C-type personality versus a skateboard company that might be much more I, right? Yeah. So just take that moment to think about your own company. Like, where would your company fit on this? Because that then also influences the overall team that you might hire. So for example, I mentioned pet wellness centers. Their team has a lot of S and I. And the reason is, well, actually it's a lot of C, S and I. A lot of S because they're about holistic well-being of the animal and the animal owner. And the reason they exist is to build better communities by looking after pets. So you see that S aspect. They're I because they're change makers in the industry, so they want to be out influencing things. And they're C because they're basically running a hospital. But there's almost no D. It's just not part of their DNA. Whereas you think of Uber like being disruptive, hitting KPIs, growing fast. You look at Travis, the founder, there's much more D and I there. Like I suspect if you lift the hood, there's probably there's no C because they don't even care about the law. They don't care about doing things the right way. It's just like, we're going to do it anyway. Let's just move fast and go. But it's interesting to think about as a company, how you want to be and how you fit, and therefore who you hire onto your team and what you need. And in the early days, you might be a lot of C because you just need to get the grunt work done, like the back end. But then you might shift over time and need more I in your organization to be the brand, to be the influence. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Yes. So next, what we've talked about so far is all the reasons why you should have a co-founder. And then we sort of went back on that and said, here's all the reasons why you don't need a co-founder. Then we looked at different ways of complementary teams. So what is a complementary team beyond just the roles that you need? We started talking about cultural fit. We started talking about diversity. We started talking about personality types and behavioral types. Now we're going to, because all of you are solo founders, right? I think all of you are, aren't you? There's no one with a co-founder?
I've got a co-founder.
You got a co-founder? Okay. So what I want to talk about next is alternatives to just going out to, I made a joke at the start, the aisle 7 of Coles and trying to pick up a co-founder. What are some alternatives to that? And this is where we can look at your holistic team that's around you, not just a co-founder. And I'm going to touch on things like outsourcing. So one way to build a team is just to outsource, like get a freelancer. I'm using Upwork quite a lot. Upwork is an alternative to freelancer. But a lot of my small jobs, I just put on Upwork now. And I'm finding I just have more time. Like ultimately as a founder, you're constantly trying to buy more of your time back. And I think we talked about that, the last session. The other thing is agencies. So, can you use an agency to fill the gaps that you have? So sort of like freelancing to an individual, but instead just contract out or subcontract out to an agency. Can you hire someone? So, just bring someone in on contract, casual, part-time. You could even, do some sort of barter system where you don't necessarily have to pay them in cash, but maybe there's some other incentive you can use. You can also look at internships. So a lot of the universities run intern programs. QUT and Griffith both have industry projects. So I've used this before. I needed an app built and I put it to Griffith, and there were 4 final year computer science students that took the project on, and I had them for a semester. They built the app. They got a learning experience out of it. That particular program cost me about $2,000. But there's other programs which are totally free. And ultimately you can then, in a lot of cases, you end up hiring. It's a great way to trial staff before hiring them. And then the other thing we're going to talk about is advisory boards, mentors, coaches, and other things. But basically the point of all this is there's lots of ways to build a team beyond just hiring someone or getting a co-founder. And I think I mentioned this mantra in the time management session we did, but switching your thinking, who instead of how. So anytime you have something to do as a founder, always ask this question: who can I get to do this for me? Not how can I do this, or not when will I do this. It's like, who can I get to do this for me? Because your time is just so precious. Your time is the thing that will limit the growth of your company. And you want to spend as much of your time as possible on the business, not in it. So you need to get out of the weeds, out of the day-to-day operations as quick as you can, even now. And obviously that's much easier said than done. And I appreciate we don't all have capital at the bank where we can just, set up teams and everything else. But that's the spirit of this next section. Who instead of how. That actually comes from a guy called Derek Sivers. He's a great person to consume his content. It's Sivers. So let's actually, yeah.
Hey, Aaron. I remember in the last one you said something along the lines of, if you can get someone to do it for less than $500 an hour or whatever, get them to do it.
Yeah.
Where did that number come from? Is that like, particular multiple, or do you consider, what is my usual hourly rate that I charge myself out at? Where did that number come from? Yeah,
it's a good question. So look, it was just a number that has sort of been floating around the startup ecosystem. It's a number that StartMate, which is an accelerator program out of Sydney, probably Australia's best accelerator. It's a number that they talk about a lot as a founder. Is one way of your decision-making framework of what you should or shouldn't do is to value your time at that. So I do think there's an argument. I mean, if your business, your clients, and your revenue and profit from an hour of your time is much higher than 500, then obviously calibrate that for your business model. So I do think you should use some sort of multiplier of your time.
Okay.
I do think it changes over time. So I don't know if I mentioned this last session, but there's this concept, I call it the evolution of yes. And that is, in the very early days starting out, we have to say yes to everything. And that's because we don't know what we should be doing. Like, we don't know the most effective use of our time. We don't know, maybe half an hour on writing this email copy for a marketing campaign, that might actually be returning me $15,000. I don't know yet because I've never done a marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. So we have to say yes to everything in the early days. We also have to say yes to everything in the early days because of building credibility and brand and building trust. But over time, the goal is to end up like, I don't know, Barack Obama, where you get paid $160 million to go do a Netflix series. Like you get the ability to say no to higher quality things over time.
Yeah.
So it does change, but yeah, it just came as a base figure. I do like the idea of you calculating one that suits you though.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Aaron.
So how do we find a co-founder? So ideally, look, the ideal scenario is you already know someone that you've worked with before, that you understand each other's nuances, and also you've been in a stressful situation before together, who have complementary skills and who are passionate about solving this particular thing that you're working on. That's the dream scenario, right? I think that you're setting yourself up for failure if you just meet a random stranger at a meetup event. Do you want to be my co-founder? Yep. All right, let's go. And the thing is, though, like I said at the start, there's enough examples of the counter of that it is possible to do. So a good friend of mine on the Gold Coast, a guy called Dan Norris, he's built multiple companies. One of them was called WP Curve that he sold 3 years ago to GoDaddy. But he and his co-founder met online. They didn't know each other. They started that company together. I actually met his co-founder in San Francisco. So the co-founder's on the other side of the world. I met his co-founder before he had met his co-founder, and they ended up building a successful company and selling it. So it can be done where you just meet someone you haven't worked with before and it works out. And I should also say the number of times I've been in co-founder disputes and mediating disagreements between two people who've known each other 30 years and they're best mates, or they were husband and wife until that point. So the reality is all relationships are messy, and I encourage you to think about finding a co-founder like you would be dating someone for a potential marriage. Really get to know them. And I've got a few tips on the next slide of how to do it, but definitely don't rush it, and don't feel this urgency of I have to have a co-founder, because I think that's where you can end up making the wrong choice. When you, the key thing with a co-founder is you need to have alignment, and you guys already picked up on this at the start, but you need to have alignment of intent. And by that, I mean, if one of you is starting the business because you're just passionate about changing the world and you want to solve this problem, and someone else is starting the business because they want to make $10 million, you're going to constantly be at friction, because the decision that you will make coming from a place of changing the world versus the decision of let's make $10 million, they're very different decision points of view, right? So making sure that you actually have alignment of intent. And one way to do that is to have the question, what does success look like to you? Like how would you define, why do you want to do this business? Why this business and not another business? Why do you want to join me into this business? And I think the red flag for me is when it is all about money. Unless you're also similar, then okay, great, let's own it, go for it. A key question to ask there that I think really works is to ask at what point would you exit from the business? Because if they say, oh, look, I just want to do a 3-year thing and then I really want to leave this and go focus on my family, or, you know, posing the question a different way. If someone came tomorrow and offered us $100,000 for the business, would you want out? Or if they offered us 10 million, would you want out? Like what is the exit point for each of you? And you might find there's a big disparity. So really, you know, when you think about a relationship, like if you're on a first date and the person you're talking to is just after a one-night stand and you're after like, well, I want to raise a family and kids and get married, it's the same sort of thing. And the way you have that in a business conversation is to ask these questions. What does success look like to you? Why do you want to do this business, not another one? At what point would you exit from the business? What would you need to walk away from the business to feel happy and content? What are we building here? Do you want to have a big team, or is this about, you know, what is this for you? Is this a passive income thing? Like, what are your goals? And the other part of that is also understanding what level of priority the business will be for them. So, you know, things like if they've got kids and something happens to their kids, will that take priority over the business? Well, you know, I know that's sort of like an extreme example, but if you understand what I'm saying, like where does this business, joining this business, sit on their priority list? And one of you mentioned at the start, like, you know, finding co-founders with their own side hustle, like immediately, you know, they're going to be distracted with their side hustle. And at some point that's going to become a question of priorities. So these are all the decisions and conversations you need to have. There's no right or wrong. This is about finding alignment. So it's just making sure you're on the same page. The other thing I'd say with this is writing it down is really useful too. And I know this might sound a bit bizarre, but even just writing down that, hey, we had this chat today. We agree to be co-founders. We're both looking to build a business that is this. And this is my vision of what it is. This is your vision of what it is. We might look at selling the business one day for $10 million, but we're not really interested in X, Y, Z. Because what happens is over time, those things change. You know, people's life circumstances change. Their family moves away from them and suddenly now they value family time more than the business, whatever it is. So write it down and just make sure you're in agreement. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all intuitive, right? It's just usually we don't take the time to actually have these conversations. And I think it's really critical. The other thing, I thought there was another slide there, but there's not. But yeah, in terms of where you can potentially meet co-founders. So look, you can go to things like hackathons and join a team, and like go to the hackathon specifically looking to find team members. So you go there, and whether you pitch an idea, whatever team you join, do it from the point of view of like, oh, wow, those people look interesting. I want to spend some time with them. I'm going to join their team. Maybe they might be a potential co-founder. Maybe I'll hire them one day. But that's a great little recruitment tool. Going to hackathons, ideation events. The other thing is meetups or any events that are in your industry. So like Jenny, in your field, you know, going to some industry events, or I mean, I appreciate there's a lot of stuff just online now, but you know, you find people who are really passionate about something, who are going to things. You start having those conversations, getting to know them. So those niche interest areas where there's a common passion are really good for finding people in alignment. And then the other thing is, doing courses or programs together. So like all of you are doing now, but where are the community hubs or the programs, and finding those like-minded people tends to be another way. Then let's assume that we've found someone. I'm just going to talk about co-founder agreements, and there's a couple of key things here. Number one, starting with vesting. I don't know if you've heard this term before, vesting, but vesting, and there's a good book, actually. I recommend a book called Slicing the Pie. I just had a mental blank on the guy's name. Let me just look it up. Slicing Pie. Mike, what's his name? I think it's Mike Moyer. Oh yeah, it is. Mike Moyer, M-O-Y-E-R. It's a very short book, easy read. I think you can even, if you search, you might even find a PDF version online. It's all about giving equity away in your company and why and how to do that. But vesting is where people have to earn their shares over time. So imagine you and a mate decide to go into business together, and you go, great, we're going to do it 50-50. We'll each own 50% of the company. And then you get 6 months in, everything's going really well, and your friend has something happen and they're like, I can't do this business anymore, I've got to step away. Now, if they took 50% of their company with them, that basically kills your business, because now you're left with only half of a company where the other person's doing nothing. And you've got to, in the future, get an investor, you've got to bring staff on, give them equity, all these other things. So what we do to protect ourselves and protect the company is we vest the shares over time. So typically the way it would work is you both are entitled to 50% of the company. You might get a small percentage of that day one, but the rest you might earn over 4 years. So every month for 4 years, you get another 1/48th of your shares actually issued to you. And that's to protect you from someone leaving early. So if someone leaves 7 months in, they'll have had 7/48ths of their shares actually allocated to them. So it's a really common thing. Vesting, you can do this not just with co-founders, you can do it with team members, like staff members. So if you bring on a developer, you give them 15%. You can vest that over 3 to 4 years, so they have to earn it over that time. You can do it with advisors. So if you're going to give an advisor 1.5% for coming in and helping you, you might vest that over 2 years, for example. So there's no right or wrong. There's definitely, ranges that are fairly typical for all these things, depending on what stage you're at. There's an interesting story Zuckerberg gave away. I think it was in the very early days of Facebook, something like 1% to an artist who did all this work for their lobby. And on public listing, that artist made some ridiculous number of millions of dollars when they went to IPO. So there's no right or wrong with this stuff, but vesting over time is really important. And the other thing I'll say here is if you do ever get investment, so if an investor comes in and puts money into the company, often that will reset the vesting. Now, what I mean by that is, say you guys have been going for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, let's say 4 years, and you own all the shares in your company, you vested them, you have them, you're entitled to them. And you go and raise $1 million of investment, and the investor says, I want you to vest your shares over 3 years. What that means is basically you have to earn back your shares over another 3 years. The reason the investor does that is because they know in the early days of a company, they're not investing in the business, they're investing in you. And the biggest risk is if you just left. So they want to make sure that you stick with the company. And the way to do that is to give you an incentive upside to do that. And that is to basically earn back your shares over time. So it's really common for founder shares to be revested at different investment rounds. Does that all make sense? It can sound complicated. It's actually quite simple. Any decent lawyer or accountant who is familiar with startups would know these terms. There's standard templates you can download. Don't be too put off by it. Definitely don't be afraid of this stuff. It's even if you don't know that's perfectly normal and that's healthy. There's so much free advice around. You can get help through it. But does everyone understand why we have vesting and the value of that? Yep. Position description. So yeah, this can sound odd. Like two people just starting a business, and it's like, you guys all know this. You got to do everything, right? Like you're the janitor, you're the salesperson, you're the accountant, do freaking everything. But when you've got even just a co-founder or team members, having position descriptions, even as simple as a couple of sentences saying, I'm going to do this, I'm responsible for this, you're responsible for this. It'll just mean you don't waste time stepping on each other's toes, that you know who's responsible for what. And it is about responsibility more than action, like more than description, if that makes sense. Like who has responsibility for getting what done. But I do encourage you to actually write that down. Again, it's part of that making sure you're on the same page with what you're both agreeing to. Delegations. So what we mean by delegations basically is, what do you have authority to do without asking anyone else? So imagine you're going to business together, you and your co-founder, and you both agree you're going to put $10,000 in the bank each. So you got $20,000 in the bank, and you come into work 2 days later and you see that your co-founder just bought a $5,000 laptop. Like, you might be pretty pissed off with that. They didn't run it by you, and they're like, oh, we've got the money in the bank. So this is why you need to have delegations. So you can have a financial delegation, which says, I'm authorized to spend up to $1,000 without seeking approval of the board or the co-founder, whatever it is. Anything higher than that, I have to go to this person for approval. Anything higher than that, I have to go through this process. You can also have, who's got authority for hiring people? Who's got authority for firing people? Who's got authority for deciding to completely change your website and branding and everything else? And how do you manage those decisions? And how do you communicate? All these sort of questions, like how are we going to have daily stand-ups together? How are you going to manage your workflow together? Will you have an Asana board so you have visibility on what you're both working on to make sure you're both working on the things that matter? But delegations, there's templates, again, you can download off Google. These can be really simple. Don't overthink it. But having something is better than having nothing. So just some dot points. And this is all to avoid conflict. Like when you have the rules, this is to define how we behave. Okay, everyone can just operate and there's no conflict. You still might get shitty that they spent, their $500 authorization on something that you don't think they should have, and you can still have that conversation, but at least it's capped, that risk. Does that make sense? Yep. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely a need to put everything in writing. The two moments in life where you end up in disputes with co-founders are obviously when everything's going shit and there's no money left. And the other time is when everything's going ridiculously well. They're the two times that you just see all the little things that have stewed up over time come out in those moments. So the more clarity everyone has on what they're responsible for, what they're allowed to do, what has to be a joint decision, what expectations are, you just avoid all those sort of issues. Another key thing to look at is your IP. So in a co-found, basically anything you do that generates IP, and by IP, I mean not just, your app or your source code or your secret 7 herbs and spices, whatever it is. I also mean things like your logo or the brochure that was designed by someone on Freelancer or Canva, like making sure that you actually own your IP. Now, I mention this because I've spent a lot of time doing due diligence on investment deals. So for a while I was Steve Baxter's analyst, and one of the biggest, so most investment deals fall over during due diligence. Due diligence is what happens is when you go for investment, you pitch, the investor looks at what you're doing, the investor's happy, the investor makes you an offer, you get a term sheet, and then it starts due diligence. And this is where the investor looks under the hood of your business to make sure that everything you said is actually true and accurate, and that there's no pending lawsuit that you didn't mention, and that you are actually making the sales that you're claiming and all that sort of stuff. Often what comes out during due diligence is it turns out that software that you outsourced to India, you never actually got copyright ownership of, and that development company actually owns it. And not only do they own it, but they've actually sold it to 17 other companies as well. So you don't even have unique source code. And suddenly the investor pulls out because I can't invest in you, you don't have anything. And this happens all the time. So you need to be really careful. So what you need is, any employees, and it's pretty standard nowadays in almost all employment contracts, anything the employee creates, the company owns. You also need it when you have subcontractors. So even if you go on Freelancer, usually there's an automatic area of Freelancer which automatically assigns the IP over to you, so that it's already there. But even just downloading that and keeping a copy of it with a record to say, when I got my logo designed by John Smith from Canada, I got this agreement that I own it and he can't sell it to 16 other people. But also for you and your co-founder. So you and your co-founder, you might create the most amazing widget, but you can't own it personally. It has to be owned by the business. So you need a little IP deed of assignment or a little thing in your contract that says anything I generate belongs to the company. And if I leave the company, it stays with the company. I don't get to take that with me. It stays with the company. The company is a legal entity and it owns that. It needs to own that IP. Does that all make sense? Again, it sounds really legal, and look, it is, but there's so many templates. Any decent lawyer anywhere will be able to craft something for you. But there's a lot of free templates you can use as well. But I can't emphasize it enough, just because I see it. It's so many companies get it wrong, and it's very easy just not to think about. And it's also actually one action item for you would be to do a bit of a health check on, you know, the IP in your company, who owns what, where's it, and look, Trish, I think from one of our convos, there's certain things that, certain IP that you use that was generated by other people, for example, just making sure that you have a documented authority to use that, for example, is important. So even if we don't own the IP, is it written somewhere that how we're allowed to use it, or the fact that we are allowed to use it, for example? Cool. How are we feeling so far? Good. Do we need to stand up and stretch legs or anything?
All good.
All good? Does anyone want a break? If you guys at Split Spaces need to get up and jump around, like feel free to.
Grab some water, I'll be back in a sec.
Yeah, go for it. The next couple of sections are more around who else you can bring into your business. Like if we're not thinking about co-founders anymore, we're not thinking about employees, who else can you bring in? And a really obvious one is advisory board. Do any of you have an advisory board or advisors at all? No?
We're an advisor.
An advisor? Yep. So look, you can have advisors. So just an independent person who gives you advice. You can pay for that. So they could be a consultant. They could be a coach, which I'll talk about in a moment. Or you could give equity. And it's quite common for me to see startups that have advisors that sometimes they pay the advisors like a small amount. Sometimes the advisor is totally free. Sometimes the advisor might have anything from 0.5% to 1.5% equity in the business. But an advisory board can be really powerful. And this can be really informal, or you can formalize it. The beauty of an advisory board is that you don't have to listen to them. So under the law, an advisory board, they're not directors. They're not a board in the legal sense. They're just basically a group of people that you've brought in to advise you. So what that means is, number one, you don't have to listen to them. So you can ask them for advice, but you're under no legal obligation to listen to them, which is different to a board of directors where you have to listen to them. You're legally obligated to. But the second thing is, for the people on that advisory board, is they have no legal obligations either. So there's no risk to them. They can give you advice and there's no risk, as opposed to a director who has risk, which I'll talk about later. Now, in terms of who you might want on your advisory board, obviously looking at your skill set. So what skills do I need to complement me and my team? That's a good way of looking at it. Another is to look at it from the point of view of sales, like who can I bring in on my advisory board who can help me sell this? Who can open doors for me? Who's a big name in my industry that just having them on my advisory board people will just take my meetings all of a sudden. They'll open the doors for me. Another one is, if you do plan in the future on raising investment funding, then who on your advisory board can help you with that? So both with investment readiness, but also with who's got access to the investor network. Maybe it is investors that are on your advisory board helping you get ready for investment. You could even have, like, if you know that one day in the future I want to be acquired, and you already know the types of companies that might acquire you. So I don't know, let's just make up Ramsay Healthcare. then having an advisor like one of the senior executives of Ramsay Healthcare on your advisory board is a really powerful way to build that relationship now, so that in the future you might be acquired by them. So there's all different reasons why you can bring advisors in. You can structure this where you just meet with them individually, one-on-one, have a coffee, really casual, no big deal. Or you can actually formalize it where you have, maybe you meet once every 2 months in a actual venue, and you have an agenda. That's another way of doing it. So it's completely up to you. An advisory board is completely free form. You can do it however you want to. Some advisors will be happy for their association with you to be public, and you could be part of their, they could be listed on your website and in grant applications. And other advisors might want distance because they're still questioning, can I trust you? Are you credible? I'm happy to help you, but I don't want to risk my brand or reputation. So I'd rather be kept private, but not on your public documents, but I'm more than happy to help you, for example. So it's up to you. There's no right or wrong here. It's just for you to negotiate. But I do encourage you to have advisory boards, like just from skill set gaps, what we talked about before with diversity, like different perspectives, challenging you. I think asking you the right questions, holding you accountable is really important. And just there'll be a great source of mentorship. So it's something that you could all start doing now. Like there's no reason why you can't have an advisory board from day one. One of my not-for-profits, we had an advisory board of maybe about 12 people, and we just ran purely on email. I would do phone calls with them every couple of months, just individually, just have a chat and sound them out on different things. And the rest of the time was just email, like, I need help with this. Are any of you connected to this? And it was great. But yeah, I know other people run them much more formally, so it's up to you. And I wanted to just contrast that now with a board of directors, because a board of directors is quite different. And this is because directors have legal responsibilities. So a director is an official, when you have a company, it's listed with ASIC. A director gets registered on the ASIC profile for your company, and they have legal obligations. So, if the company acts fraudulently, if the company becomes insolvent, then the directors can actually be personally liable in some of those cases. And what that means is some people that you might want on your board of directors are reluctant to do it because there's a risk. And as you get more established or build credibility, that they'll become more comfortable. Now, in terms of who you could put on your board, it's very similar. All the same reasons that I just went through for your advisory board are same reasons to bring people onto your board of directors. What I would add for your board of directors, though, is like my personal preference. I like having an accountant on my board, because they think back to that C-type perspective. They'll bring that perspective of tax obligations, financial compliance, audit, accounting, bookkeeping, numbers. So they'll bring that lens and they'll question you on that stuff. The second thing I like to add to my board is a lawyer, because lawyers are naturally very risk adverse, and I'm the opposite. I like my natural state. If I see risk, it's like, yeah, I'm going there. So having a lawyer there will ask all the tough questions. They'll also make sure that you're behaving legally. They'll do things like encourage you to create procedures and documents and protect your butt. So an accountant and a lawyer are great people to have on your board. Personally, I also like to have a really good entrepreneur on my board, like a really experienced entrepreneur who's had multiple exits, built something bigger than I've built, just for that commercial lens. So when I was running Startup Catalyst, like my board was an accountant, a partner at McCulloch's law firm, and Steve Baxter. And that was perfect for me. Like it was just, that's all I needed at that time. On other boards though, you really want industry people. So who's giving you industry credibility? So if you have, like for a couple of you, for example, like someone who's an amazing name in the healthcare sector. Like for example, if you could get one of the startups I know, they've got Professor Ian Fraser on their board. Like immediately there's a badge of credibility there. Because obviously if Ian, the inventor of Gardasil, thinks it's amazing, then far out. Maybe these guys are actually amazing. Like, that's just the way we work, right? Pattern recognition. But yeah, who's that industry person who will give you all the insights into the market, the insights into how to bring something to life? The investor side, so who's helping you with investment readiness, opening doors for investors, if that's what you need. We don't all need to do that. And then the exit strategy. So like I said before, and this is something Aussie startups don't do well, but I see a lot in the US. So in the US, in Silicon Valley, when a company starts, they already know day one who will acquire them. Like, it's going to be, they'll list 3 companies who will likely acquire them. And when they'll know the exact person in those companies who manages M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and they'll build a relationship with those people and invite them to have an active role in the company. Because, you know, even if it takes them 7 years to build that business to exit, the head of M&A at PayPal has been on their board for 7 years and knows them inside out. So when it comes time for the exit, it's a no-brainer. They're just going to acquire the company. So think about that. And again, I'm speaking from a lens. I'm mentioning things like investment raising and exits. That's not all of our goals. And if you want to build a business that doesn't do that, that's perfectly, absolutely amazing. Don't feel you have to do all these things. I'm just flagging them as different things to think about. Now, then in terms of a board, you should, there's lots of documents that you should set up. And again, there's templates, and any decent lawyer will help you with these. But basically, the board has a terms of reference. So what decisions does the board make? How does the board operate? How often do they catch up? How do they meet? Do they get paid? So some boards are entirely volunteer. Some boards get paid a retainer. Some boards just get paid their travel expenses. Some boards just get paid $150 for per meeting. Some boards get equity. So again, this is all just for you to commercially negotiate. Totally up to you. The other part of this, though, is because boards have a legal responsibility, you need to actually keep records. So you should have an agenda for board meetings. You should have if you're the founder and CEO, you should prepare a board pack that goes to the board. And in that board pack, you should give your financial report, your update on all the activities of the business, what's been happening, any OH&S issues. Like, there's a standard template. And I've got heaps of templates, so I'm happy to share all of these too if they're valuable. Because basically the way it works is the CEO reports to the board. So the CEO presents their report to the board will make decisions and then basically give those decisions to the CEO to go and execute on. But the other part of that is minutes. So you should keep minutes from board meetings, because in the event that you get sued, you want to have something that says the board discussed this and the board did this and the board decided this, to protect those board members. So you can prove that you were acting, with good governance, that you weren't just, dodgy operators like doing Exxon or something like that. So minutes and keeping minutes, they become legal records for your company. Now, in the early days, if there's just 1 or 2 of you, starting your business and you are the directors, I still encourage you to actually put on your hat and have a directors meeting. Say, right now, we're going to act as directors. We're not acting as co-founders. We're not acting as employees. We're acting as directors. We're going to have a meeting. We're going to have an agenda. We're going to take minutes. And the reason I say that is, number one, it gives you really good practice. And that practice is good. Number two, it makes you think about corporate governance, which is quite different to just running a business. Number three, it demonstrates, like, if ever you do get an investor in the future, or you bring someone in to be on your board in the future, like you approach someone to be on your board, if you can point to a history of here's all our previous directors meetings, and look, even though it's 2 of us, we believe in this and this is important, that reflects really well on you. So a future director coming in sees that you've been operating legally and that you've got good governance and that you guys are serious about this. And so a new director comes in less risk mindful, feeling more confident. So yeah, I encourage you to just get into the practice of doing all these things right now. And the last reason, even if there's just 1 or 2 of you, if you did get sued for something, being able to present, a good body of evidence to court, it will bias the court in your favor, basically. So that's advisory boards and boards. Does that all make sense? Any questions on, like, there's lots we could talk about there. But any questions on any of that?
You had someone on your board of directors. They would own a share in your business.
They don't have to. So
Why would they take the risk then? Why would they take the risk of?
Because they love it.
Yeah, they're not really thinking out.
No. Can I answer that one? Because I have some history of being boards, as a board of directors, a few things, and family members, and we do it A, because we love it, and B, because sometimes you get paid, like it might be $10,000 a year, or it might be like that per thing to just be on different boards, and sometimes it's something that they're really interested in doing.
Yeah.
So in all the boards that I've done, I've never owned part of a company. I've either been paid or just done it voluntarily, and we do it for that reason. So
you're not on a board of advisors, so you're a director in that company legally?
Oh, I'm only one of them I've done legally, but I've never owned any part of that company. So
we have we started a company 3 years ago. We do property subdivisions, and there's 4 of us, and all 4 of us have got 4 equal shares, and we're all directors.
that's interesting. Yeah.
So I don't understand. I guess if you have the passion for it, but you're taking a legal responsibility of a company that you don't have a share for. I guess it could be a good thing if the company is bad. You're taking a risk if you are on it.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So the short answer is there's lots of reasons. One is it might be someone who's completely bored in their day-to-day job and they're looking to live vicariously through your startup and they just want to be part of it because it's exciting. I know so many corporate executives that are bored out of their fucking mind. It's like they want to do a startup, but they're not in a place in life or family risk where they can. So this is their way of doing it. Number 2 is sometimes people will take a board role in a small business so that they build up their own board experience to get a bigger board role that does pay in the future. So we see that a lot as well. Another reason, definitely that point of they just find it fun and exciting. And particularly if you're doing something that's changing the world, like they'll just, this might be their altruistic moment to have impact. And they're like, fuck yes, this needs help. I'm in.
Be part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, there are some having some skin in the game, giving your directors or anyone really some skin in your company, some equity, does sometimes change their level of commitment and their bias towards things as well. So it can be really powerful for them to have some sense of ownership. Absolutely.
It sounds like it could be almost a way to find co-founders as well. If you have someone that's on your board of directors and they show you that they're trustworthy and that they have a passion for what you're doing, then maybe it's a way to find someone to share a company with.
Yeah. And like one thing I haven't said before, but often when you're bringing people into your business and you're at the point right now where you can't offer them anything, it's like, I have no money. My company valuation, I can't even give you a valuation of what I'm doing. So there's no point giving you equity. But what you can say is, look, I'd like to bring you in and let's work together for 12 months. And if we're both loving it, at that point, I'd be happy to convert you to, this sort of pay, or if we hit this milestone, I'm happy to offer you this, because then they know that they're being brought into something where there's a future prospect of benefit for them. So, and you can even, I've seen this even with developers. I've seen really talented developers join a startup where they're not getting paid any money, but they're being told that when the company achieves this financial goal, then you'll automatically get this salary. So yeah, I think you can have those conversations, set that expectation. I think that's quite healthy. So next, I won't dwell on this one too much, but everything we've talked about so far is the business. Like, we need all these people for the business. I'd encourage you to think about just you as a human. Like, who do you need around you? And I encourage you to think of like, a Formula One racing team, the driver, Like you think of all the hundreds of engineers that make the car, you think of all the pit crew, but then the driver has a nutritionist, a physiotherapist, a psychologist, a physical trainer. Like they have an entire support crew just for them as a person. And I'd encourage you to think about your own life that way. So, who's your support crew? And this includes your family members, like including them on the journey, letting them know what you need. So your partner or spouse, like letting them know that there's times where I just need to have a download with you. I just need to be able to vent. I need to be able to get all this stuff out. And I'm not looking for you to fix my problems. Please don't tell me to quit this because it's all too stressful and go and get a real job. Just understand. I just want your support. But yeah, who do you have around you? And like, I can share that most of the entrepreneurs I work with actively see psychologists because it's really fucking hard. Entrepreneurship's hard, and you need someone to talk to, and you need people you can talk to without fear of being judged. And if we can improve ourselves by 1%, like why wouldn't you do that? Why, if you want to be 1% healthier or happier or whatever it is, like, of course I'm going to do that. So look, I can share, I have 2 coaches, a guy, so some of you might know Mark Sowerby, the first Queensland chief entrepreneur, and a guy called Michael Dempsey that you might not know. He's an entrepreneur. And then I do have a psychologist. I don't actively see her at the moment, but definitely the last 2 years of dealing with relationship stuff while trying to build businesses has had its challenges. But outside of that, I have a lawyer who I just know I can pick up the phone at any time and get really good advice. Like I'm not going to him for formal advice often. It's just more that, hey, can I just sanity check this with you? I have a really good accountant that I know any question at all, like she replies within 5 minutes. It's just amazing. And what I love about her is she's proactive. Like as soon as ScoMo announces something, I feel like 20 minutes later, I've got an email in my inbox saying how it impacts me. And then just my peer group. So more than anything else, what gets me, there's 2 things that get me through actually. Oh no, 3. 3 is like my life partner. So just the fact that she understands me on a level that no one else does, and reads things, without me having to say anything, just knows. Number 2 is my social group, and just people who, again, I can have the most honest, vulnerable conversations with, and I know there's no judgment there. And number 3 for me is the community that's within my business peak persona, just that tribe of people I can go to, and I know that they're always there to pick me up when I'm having a wobbly moment. So they're mine. I'm more than happy to share those. But I just think it's such an important part is to make sure that you are looked after. And I've just mentioned a lot of the psychological aspects, I guess, and social, but also looking at your physical health, who's around you helping you on that journey. So yeah, I really encourage you to think about your well-being. And I know, Trish, you're really passionate in this space. I just think it's so critical though. So yeah, maybe just an exercise to take away afterwards is like, look at all the areas of your life, who you're getting financial advice from, who's your sounding board, who's your support crew for you, not just your business, I think is really critical. And I think this is the last slide, but buddy up. So there is nothing like having another peer group of entrepreneurs around you who are like all of you, right? To hold you accountable and to just vent and share frustrations and just normalize our emotions. Like when you feel something, to be able to tell someone else that and go, yeah, well, that's normal. I feel exactly the same. Or even better, when you fuck something up and you go tell them and they're like, oh, you reckon that's shit? You should see what I did yesterday. So much power in that. So create little buddy and accountability systems. I think it's really valuable. Find those people you click with who are on a similar journey. Actually, I lied. I do have 2 more slides. One is mentors, and one is coaches. Now, I just one small point of distinction. So a mentor is someone who is speaking from an experience base. So usually there's someone that's a few steps ahead of you, or they've been there, done that, and they're speaking from, well, here's what worked for me. So typically a mentor is not paid. It's just like an informal relationship. You might catch up often or you might catch up really infrequently, but it's just, just someone who's speaking from life experience. And typically it's around a business thing, typically it's around something you're doing. And look, these are not formal definitions by any means, but having mentors around you, like experienced people who've been there, done it before, they're speaking from a place of experience. And one little way to know you've got a good mentor is like, what I'm getting advice on, would I swap shoes with that person? So if I'm getting mentoring from someone on finances, then if I'm not if they're in a really bad financial situation, then why am I going to that person for mentoring? That's how to think of a mentor, is that it's an experience thing. As opposed to a coach, which is often, there might be a coach who is amazing at what they do, but they've never actually done it themselves. So I think of Wayne Bennett, right? Like one of the best coaches. But, in terms of would he be an amazing player? No, probably not. But could he get a team to win like so many premierships? Absolutely. So a coach is someone who they typically, it's less about like they might be really experienced too. I shouldn't dismiss that. But it's often more about looking at your mindset or challenging you, or it's more about actually your personal development. So when you say something and you're like, oh, I'm really struggling with this and I need help with this, a mentor might say, well, here's the way I did it. Whereas a coach might say, well, hang on, is that really the best use of your time? Like what's really holding you back there? Like, go through the psychology and your own inner self-talk and all the bullshit in your head and hold you accountable to goals and all that sort of stuff. Again, coaches can be paid or unpaid. They can be volunteer, or they can be paid. But I'd encourage you to just, it's a small point, that distinction, but I think it is worth making. And that's it. So that's all the content. Let me just stop that share. I feel like that was a lot.
I do get a lot of happiness out of mentoring other people.
Yep.
I've just started mentoring a girl who's struggling with a building design course. She's been coming over every Friday night and finding it really amazing. Yeah. To be able to share my knowledge.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite common for groups to form like a founders circle or a founders club, and it might be 6 people who catch up for coffee once a month. It's like 7:30 in the morning on the last Thursday a month, we catch up for coffee. And some of those conversations are just completely social. Nothing's discussed business-wise. And then other times they end up in like a sort of like, that masterclass type group mentoring, or just sharing of life experience through a particular thing. And then, mentoring, like for each of you, the saying about, if you really want to know something, teach it.
Yeah.
I think mentoring is a little bit different, obviously, but it can help us actually get our own clarity through things. Definitely for me, like the people I coach, I get so much value, and everything I learn out of their perspective on stuff is incredible. And it is very rewarding. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had, Jenna, the other day I mentored a lady who was writing her very first book. And she asked me at first, she was like, oh, I want to talk about time management. And I freaked out for a moment because I'm like, oh my God, how am I supposed to coach somebody else on time management when that's something where I'm, trying to struggle with? And then through the whole session, I was like, oh, I have an answer for that. Oh, I know how to do that. Oh, this is totally fine. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, I do know all of that stuff. And it was really great for me. I mean, I can't, business over there, I have no idea, but my product of my service and what I actually do, I realized that I know more than I give myself credit for. And so it was actually really, really great to do that. So,
I think one thing that often happens to me, particularly with this one person that I'm coaching, I often find, like, as I say something, it's like, I'm not doing this shit. Like, I know what. Why am I not doing this? And this is why I need 2 coaches to call it out and tell me, yes, Aaron, you dickhead, you should be doing this. Like, but I think the other part of it is the intellectual honesty to know what we're good at and what we're not good at, and just owning that and being comfortable saying, you know what, Yeah, I have no clue. Don't talk to me, but maybe talk to someone else. The challenge with that is, like you were just saying, often we don't actually recognize the value of what we do know. To us, it's so insignificant, but to someone else on their journey, that might be a really pivotal thing. And this is the value of those social groups. Like if you have a founder circle or a couple of, just having those conversations where they might not even realize that they're sitting on some amazing nugget, but they are to you. Like it's a key piece of info. Yeah. How are we feeling at this point? Well, yeah, just generically, how are we feeling? Was that useful so far? Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I don't know about the co-founder thing, but I really enjoyed the stuff about teams and adapting and looking at all the different things that people have to offer, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The inside of my brain is just firing on all sparks. I'm like, okay, cool, right. What I really want to do is get on a goddamn plane and go and see people. That's what I want to do right now. I just want to, like, right, I'm on a plane, but I can't, and it's really frustrating. And
yeah.
So,
Aaron, I found the comments about the co-founder interesting. You know, over the years, you know, I quite often get asked who my co-founder is because I don't have any tech skills.
Yep.
You know, and, you know, large part of our business is selling software subscriptions.
Yeah.
And I, you know, quite often get asked about that. And as soon as I say I don't have one, you're almost like written off straight away.
Absolutely.
I find it really, really frustrating.
Yep. Yeah, it is the most common first question and criteria. So you're absolutely right. And like, I guess, first of all, understanding from the investor perspective, the reason they're asking that question is because, you know, statistical probability, and also, you know, it's like running a restaurant and outsourcing a kitchen. So I understand the logic of the argument. The challenge is we're not all in that situation where we can just magically manifest a co-founder or have one or bring one in. So my thing with that is, if you can articulate the vision of the future of your company, because presumably, so there's definitely a lot of arguments at some point you're going to have it in-house. Like, depending what you want to build, that is usually a better outcome because usually it's cheaper, you can move faster, you've got less tech risk, you've got more certainty about your IP, everything else. So at some point in the future, that would be the goal. So if you can articulate to an investor, right now, no, here's where I'm at, but I'm building to this point, and by this point, I'll then build a team, and this will happen, and this will happen. That's one way of getting around the investor bias. Yeah. But yeah, it's really tough to have those conversations. And this is the friction point because the investor, I want to say, is spoilt for choice. So if they're looking at multiple companies and the other has their in-house, it's like, well, that's less risk. I'm going to go with that. So it's not that they're wrong.
Is that I've had with, you know, development teams before, you know, and I've used a few different organizations now, you know, and I thank goodness that they were not part of, you know, that they didn't end up with equity in the company.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, I've got a really good guy now, which, you know, we're starting to have those discussions.
Yep.
But in the past, you know, I was almost, hallelujah, that's over.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know,
totally.
I don't, when you're talking to, you know, potential investors, you don't want to, you know, come across as, no, I don't think I need them. Or, you know, no, I don't think that they're important. But at the same time, it's kind of like, yeah, but I also don't want to be wedded to the wrong one.
Absolutely. So, yeah, so there's a few things in that. So there's a lot in how to onboard new developers and test developers and all those sort of things. Working with someone as a subcontractor, or say you outsource your development work. Taking the time to really get to know the developers on that team and maybe poaching them one day, like hiring them in, is a great strategy because you get to see them work over time. And eventually when you're at a point where you can afford it, get them to come over. Obviously the vesting really helps too. So if they were part of your team, you can set it up where no one gets equity for 6 months. It's like a probation period. And then after that, they still earn it over time, but at least then you're protected. So if it works out terrible. And it happens a lot. Like I know one of the companies I work with, they've had an engineering firm they outsourced to for 12 months. And they just haven't done well. So anyway, we put on a second firm to make sure that, you know, they're protected. And the second firm looked at the work of the first firm and found out that it was all just totally not usable. It's a waste of 12 months. But so sometimes you've got to hedge your bet and have multiple teams running because it is so hit and miss, the quality of the standard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge when you don't have that background.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, the founder of Twilio, so Twilio is like digital phone calls and SMS. It's an application. Yeah. Big company out of San Francisco now. But the founder of that, she was pretty young when she started and had the idea. And she wasn't technical, but she knew that when she started, she'd either have to be able to sell it or build it. They're the two roles in an early stage company. And the fear of going out and talking to people, she was such an introvert. So I don't want to go and talk to anyone. I would rather teach myself to code. So she taught herself to code, which is pretty remarkable. And look, it worked for her.
Yeah.
But I also think like that time to upskill is a big loss of time as opposed to staying at what you're good at. So I guess what I'm trying to say with that is owning what you're good at when the investors ask these questions and articulating why you've deliberately chosen to be like this. Like, it's not that I couldn't find someone. I want it like this because in the future, here's my plan and strategy that I'm executing on. That's really compelling. All right.
Yeah.
And if the investor doesn't like that, then they're not the right fit for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron.
Cool. Any other questions about anything from today? Like are any of you actively looking for a co-founder right now? Yeah.
I'm looking for team members, but not necessarily a co-founder.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking now that we've had this, like I was looking for a co-founder before and, you know, trying to look for somebody either in the US or here or somebody, you know, anywhere. But I'm actually wondering now whether or not trying to find that advisory board to then who may possibly become the board of directors may be better for myself rather than trying to find that co-founder. So I'm actually wondering whether or not that might be a better idea.
Yeah, it could be. I think it comes down to a question of where will you get the most impact, like in terms of your time and growth of the business and everything else. And you just made me think of something, which is sometimes people start as an advisor and end up becoming a co-founder because you just work out that you work really well together and they're really interested and they've got a ton of experience and industry knowledge and connections. So it's a good way to potentially find a co-founder anyway.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking that that's maybe the part that I might go down instead of trying to put all my energy into finding one or two people, find 5 or 6 people and then go from there. So, yeah.
Yep.
I've recently started using an advisor this year. You know, the initial goal was to put together an advisory board, you know, with 2 or 3, you know, complementary, you know, backgrounds and skill sets. But at the moment, I've just settled on the one as, you know, engaged him as the chair of the advisory board, you know, with the intent of putting together the board. And it's been a really good reflective exercise. But what I also know, you know, when I interviewed a bunch of people for it, and particularly at the time I was feeling incredibly fragile. And so I didn't want anyone, you know, on the board who I felt was going to attack me every time we caught up, you know, so I got a really kind of calm, balanced person. And I actually spoke to him about why I selected him over the others and about that kind of approach. And we've had some more discussions recently, you know, where he's, you know, said, I can be harder on you if you like. You know, and it's actually been quite good, you know, that we're able to discuss, you know, at what level of push you know, and accountability versus, you know, support. It's been really good, and to be able to have those open conversations about that,
Yes.
I think is really important, because I've been involved in some in the past, and I guess I didn't speak up about what I needed from a, you know, personality match perspective, not just a skill set.
Yeah.
So it, you know, for anyone else that's putting them together, I think, you know, being open about that, you know, I think has been really good for the relationship.
That's awesome. I totally agree. I think you said something there that really resonated for me, which was what I need from you. I think setting that expectation, like as you bring people in, it's like, here's what I need from you. And that could be, you know, specific, like I need advice on this, whatever, or I need you to help me sell this. But then even being vulnerable enough to say, here's how I get triggered. You know, if you said this to me, I'll get triggered and go into a mental spiral of doom. Like one of my triggers is if you tell me I can't do something, like, oh, you'd never be able to do that. It's like,
Yes.
like I have to, I become obsessed with it, even if it's the most stupid thing that I shouldn't be doing. So knowing our triggers and sharing our triggers with others is really powerful. It basically, there's a lot of trust there because you're empowering someone else with your kryptonite. But when it's used correctly, it can really empower you, and you'll have healthier conversations. But what you made me think of, like, so we could actually run one of these sessions. There's a heap of language techniques and like communication styles and meeting formats and all these things that we can actually share. A lot of it comes from the work of Brene Brown, Mel Robbins, some of the stuff out of the US and the Deezies and others. We could actually do a session on that sort of stuff if any of you are keen on, language techniques for really honest conversations.
Yeah, I think it works two ways, you know, when we're asking people for help and support, but also when people are coming to us for help and support. Like, it's not just about recognizing things in us, but also being able to recognize that in someone else that's talking to us as well.
Completely. Yep.
Yeah, let's run one there, Aaron. That'd be good.
Yeah, sign me up.
Okay, cool.
And Aaron, I just wanted to throw out there to the team, to the guys as well, I guess if anybody's interested in exploring their disc a little bit further, anybody wants to have a session on that, I'm happy to do that. I'm a practitioner. So if somebody wants to, you know, really have a good look at their blind spots or development opportunities within that, or are looking for how they balance up, I'm happy to help out.
That's awesome, Trish.
Thanks, Trish.
That's awesome. I was just thinking I'll find my one that I did in 2015, but not look at it, do another one and then compare it and see what's changed. It'd be interesting, actually. Yeah.
I was wondering, you know, with the interpretation of that, you know, when you have things, you know, reasonably balanced in just about all the quadrants, you know, does that mean that you're balanced or that you're in eternal conflict with yourself?
Personality.
That can lead to a little bit of indecisiveness, that one.
You're all Power Rangers in one. That's what it is. Captain Planet. You're Captain freaking Planet. That's what it is.
It's no wonder I get frustrated that I don't get anything done.
Yeah. Oh, look, like Trish would share this too. I think a lot of how, like, the context of the situation you're in and who's around you will bias how it presents.
It is where you are too. When you're at home with your children, you're going to be a little bit different too. Yeah. When you're at work and when you're with your friends, it's probably going to be a little bit different as well, right?
Yeah.
It's actually about being able to sort of don those different hats when required as well, you know, and rather than just being that's me, I'm a D, or that's me, I'm an I, and everybody's going to have to adapt to me. It's about going, okay, when do I need to put my S hat on, you know, within relationships or interactions with others? How do I step out of my comfort zone? And just that level of awareness around how, you know, these triggers or things might actually occur and how you can relate it back to that's because, you know, me. So it doesn't mean we all get to stay in our comfort zone. It's all about building that level of awareness to go, okay, well, how do I comfortably step outside of it? And what are the things I'm going to have to equip myself with to be successful in that space?
embracing the other person as well.
Yeah.
It's so true. Because I've seen sometimes people use these where it's like, it's like they'll say, "Oh, you're such a C," like an accusation, or they'll, like you were just saying, Trish, like they sort of hide behind it. It's like, "Well, I'm a D, so that's just how I am," and it's like, well, but you have a choice. Yeah, you have to be a dickhead. Yeah, so it's so true. How are we all going? Do you guys have any other suggestions for other content or workshops and stuff? I did go through with Deb some ideas for the next couple of months to see us through to Christmas, but we're both saying like happy to change it all however you want. But what are the biggest issues and things you're facing at the moment? And obviously we've got the one-on-one, so I think I've got 4 one-on-ones scheduled for this afternoon, but always available to chat too. So
I've been avoiding you because I haven't finished my website. I'm going to be honest. I'm actually in the process of hiring someone to finish it before I talk to you again.
Look at you go, Dee.
Aaron said, "When are you going to have it finished?" I said, "Give me a month." He said, "I want it done in 3 days." I'm like, "Well, I'm not talking to you again."
Yeah.
Do you know, my biggest thing is that one of my clients passed away just days before we were set to start their memoir.
Oh
no.
That sucks. And for me, it's trying to get the, you know, we'll schedule my one-on-one with you. It's about getting that sense of urgency and, you know, people understand it. And if there's urgency, and then there really is legitimately urgency where you have to do this or it will never get done. So yeah, you can talk about that, but it's interesting from a marketing perspective where you're trying not to, I put an ad out and somebody put a nasty comment on there, like, and I was like, but I'm actually just trying to help. And so it's an interesting balance of where you're marketing for urgency legitimately, and yeah, how do you balance that?
yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, that's definitely something.
If anyone also too, something that I'm trying to work on now, or you know, will be coming up, is more developing, you know, online communities, two-way marketplaces, you know, that type of thing where, you know, providing people the tools to interact, but not actually forcing that interact, you know, trying to develop that a two-sided marketplace, a two-sided, you know, community. The things around that would be of interest to me, you know, where you kind of get out of the way and you're more augmenting it rather than doing it.
Yeah, that I can definitely share some experience there. So we could talk about that. Okay. Yeah, there's a good suggestion. I'm conscious of time, so we've gone 4 minutes over, and I want to respect all your time and let you get about your day and everything else. But if you do have other ideas, like for content for these sessions, just like Slack me anytime. And yeah, keep booking in every 2 weeks, those Tuesday afternoon sessions. Like keep booking in the one-on-ones, always available. And if for some reason Tuesdays just don't work for you, like just flag that with me. Always happy to make time where I can. But otherwise, yeah, I hope this has been useful. And
no, it's been good.
Looking forward to chatting. Cool.
Thanks, Aaron.
I'm happy to stay on for a couple of minutes if you have anything. Otherwise, yeah, I'll see you at the next one.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. You guys all good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. See ya.
Yeah.
Yeah.